it's not celebration, it's commemoration, which to me suggests a need to engage with and to consider and to reflect, not simply some two-dimensional reenactment. I was born on the 50th, in the year of the 50th anniversary of 1916. And I grew up in a kind of Fianna Fáil Republican household, an old-style Fianna Fáil Republican household. So, I mean, our reference points to history were grounded in that kind of republicanism. And all of the mythology and stories and half-spoken truths and secrets around it were in the air. From not just from 1916, but that whole area of Irish history was all around us, even in the ways that it wasn't spoken of. So an example of that would be our father built our house, but we lived on a farm that our grandfather had farmed. So my father inherited the farm from his father. But where the house was built, there was always this story about how three Free State soldiers had died during the Civil War outside what was now the back door of the house, but that was all we knew, and that they'd had a bad death. And nobody spoke about it until after the peace process, and then lots of stuff came out about that. And of course that made me aware of the fact that, well, my family may well have been involved in that if they died on land that was our land at that time. So there was all of this, there were all of these facts and non-facts and secrets and mythology and all of the rest of it around it. And then there was the experience of how we were taught history in school, which I think it's fair to say was a pretty slanted kind of take on history. So 1916 was this revered touchstone, but something that was never talked about there was never any particular kind of critical analysis, and I don't mean critical as in judgmental analysis, I mean critical, considered analysis of what it was about or what it stood for or what it meant. And it was years later, really. I lived out of Ireland for 17 years. I left Ireland when I was 19 and didn't come back until I was in my mid to late 30s. And it was only when I came back and started to engage in working on social justice and human rights issues here in Ireland and asking questions that kind of meant that we had to open up conversations about how we worked as a country, that I really began to think about 1916 and those principles and those ideas, and not just 1916, but 19 and the first Dáil, you know, the proclamation itself, the programme of government of the first Dáil, all those years later, well, a few years later, and then everything that followed from that up to and to the 1937 Constitution. So what 1916 has come to mean to me is very different to what it meant to me for most of my life. Now what it means to me is a reference point that I think we need to use as a kind of an accountability check, a moment where we reflect back on the ideas that we say underpinned the foundation of the Republic, of our state, of our society, and actually begin to explore whether or not we've delivered on those, whether we should have. You know, a moment when we can use as a touchstone for true self-reflection and for some measure of accountability. That's what it means to me now, but that's quite different, I think, to what it meant to me up until the last few years. I mean, I can remember writing a piece. I mean, I was very involved in the whole area of investigations into child sexual abuse in this country, particularly involving the Catholic Church. And when I started that work, the questions that I was asking from both a personal perspective and then from a much broader perspective were bigger than, you know, who did this happen to? They were, why did this happen? And where was the state? And what was the state's role in all of this? And if the state didn't have a role in all of this, doesn't that say something about the state's abdication of its responsibility for really important functions? You know, functions and ideas and principles that really do underpin the whole 1906 period and everything that came before it. And I can remember after the Ferns report, one of the first reports into child sexual abuse within the Catholic Church came out. And it was the first time globally that a report in any state had been critical of the Vatican. and I can remember the then Taoiseach Bertie Ahern making frankly a defence of the church in response to that report, and just being stunned by that. And I remember writing a piece in the Irish Times reminding him that Wolfe Tone, dreamt of and foresaw and worked for a republican democracy, not a Catholic republic, but a true democratic republic. And so, I mean, for me, these issues have always been obvious and important, and I think it's absolutely critical. And there's huge value in us engaging with, in a really honest way, the whole idea of why we are who we are, or even the notion that it's not that I think every society and every state should do it, but we can only do it in our own context. So even if we just unpick it a bit and think, well, why did we decide that we needed to come together as a society and build and be a nation, and then give that expression legally and politically, for what purpose? And to me, if we want to go back and have moments where we can think about purpose, then the proclamation, 1916, everything that came from that, are touchstone moments that we should look to and try and re-engage with, and then look to evolve our thinking from. Adopting and accepting what we think is valuable, and then setting aside what we think isn't. But instead what we do is too often we celebrate martyrdom rather than statehood. We celebrate bloodletting rather than the principles and the vision and the purpose that was meant to underpin that sacrifice in the first instance. And that's, I think, rather empty and vacuous, and actually disrespectful, ultimately, of the kind of sacrifice that so many people made. So for me, it's really important that we reflect on those big ideas, that we ask ourselves those big, broad questions. Because I think we've lost a lot of idealism, really positive, important idealism. We've certainly, I think, too often in our history abandoned an ability to be self-reflective and self-critical and look to ourselves rather than look to what others might make of us or think of us. I think we have the most extraordinary, at times, we manifest, I don't think it's true of who we are, but we manifest as a state, and I think our political system does this, as being desperately concerned with what the rest of the world might think of us, as opposed to really reflecting on and asking ourselves, what do we think of who we are ourselves, and is that good enough by our standards, not by anybody else's? So we've that strange mix of, we manifest in a way, particularly politically, I think, as having a weird mix of an inferiority and an incredible superiority complex. This notion that we have to be the best little country in the world for this, that, and the other. What does that even mean? And why would any people or any state or any republic test its own value against the value of other societies or other, it's not relative. We are who we are. The best that we can be is the best that we can be. Not relative to somebody else, but against the standards that we set for ourselves. And I think 1916 can be an important moment to kind of set those standards. I'm not a big fan of the commemoration of martyrdom. And that doesn't mean that I don't value or respect, and that I'm frankly not even in awe of the level of sacrifice that those who came before us made. For the idea of Ireland, and Ireland as a republic, and Ireland as a true republican democracy built on really important principles like equality and self-determination, and mutual regard and respect, and actually care and caregiving. Like the most misquoted line from the proclamation, as we know, is cherishing all the children of the nation equally. What an aspiration, what an ambition in 1916 to build a republic that cherished its people equally. So, we're a republic, we're a society that's meant to be built on a concept of care, of cherishing, of love, and solidarity and interdependence. Those are such critically important concepts. And I just, in the militarization of commemoration, that gets lost, I think. And in the failure to engage with the ideas or to think about those ideas, it absolutely gets lost. So for many years, I've when we restarted commemoration, and the commemoration was a military parade down O'Connell Street, that seemed to me to be missing really vital components of rechecking. I mean, it's not celebration, it's commemoration, which to me suggests a need to engage with and to consider and to reflect, not simply some two-dimensional reenactment in some way, so that we can deify bloodletting. There was nothing majestic. There's nothing majestic about death. There's nothing majestic about destruction. There's nothing majestic about the deaths of everybody who died in 1916, or all of the death and violence that followed that in the Civil War. There's nothing majestic about that. But there is something incredibly, profoundly important and noble about the ideas. And yet we don't engage with them. And we still haven't. So I think this year it's been better. I think there's been an awful lot more thought and consideration of those ideas and those principles. But I'm not sure, however, it was in the official commemoration side of things. The official commemoration seemed to be much of the same. Now, where it was remarkably different, and I think this is incredibly valuable, it was a lot less partisan. It was an awful lot more inclusive. We're not just in a year of commemoration, we're in a decade of commemoration. And we're commemorating and acknowledging the song. The role that Irish men and women played in the First World War. In all of that decade of history, we're going to commemorate moments, and that's really important. So that's a big, big step forward. I mean, I grew up in an Ireland where, in my home village, there was, the Protestant family who lived over the field, and we pointed. That's where the Protestant family lived. We didn't know their names. And I don't think I ever met them. And it was a tiny village where, frankly, if you scratched your ear, everybody knew about it. But there was this family who were other, who lived over there. So it's a huge step forward, and a really important one. I mean, it's awful that it is such a big step forward, but it's been a really important one over the last 20 years that we have become a society that is much more inclusive, that's prepared to look more at the degrees to which we othered, significant minorities or sections of our society. And in a decade of commemoration that we're really doing something about that. That's valuable. But I still don't think that we've used, or certainly at the official level, I don't think. It's happening more at the civil society level, at the level of media to some degree, and certainly within the arts it's happening more. But I don't think at the official level there's been a lot of thinking put into how this needs to be a key accountability moment, a key check-in, a key reframing or rethinking or re-engagement with the kind of state that we are, and the state's the state's both responsibility to its people, but also, as even the 1937 Constitution makes clear, that the state is a manifestation of its people, that the state exists not to govern its people, but to give expression to and to nurture and care for the people of the state, that we are the state. So, those ideas, I think, are the kinds of things that we need to tie from 16 to 37 and forward, and then really check in on. And I don't think that's happening within this period of commemoration, and I think it needs to. But I am really, really proud of the journey that we've undertaken as a people. And maybe especially over the last 20 years or so, the degree to which we've opened up and we've developed a significant capacity. We're not there yet either, but a significant ability to look more honestly at ourselves. Now, we've been forced to as well. So all of the scandals, whether it be the child abuse scandals, issues around the Magdalen laundries, how we've treated women. I mean, for me, if we want to talk about 1916 and we want to look at where we are in 2016, one of the key paths that we need to track and own is the really clear line between how we abandoned one of the key principles, the principles of equality, particularly when it came to women and women within our society, within our state, post-1916, and have not delivered on that, and how that still resonates in our republic today. It's changed a lot, it's moved forward a lot, but it absolutely resonates still in 2016 Ireland. And I think that's one of the big issues that we do really need to get to grips with. But at the same time, I think we've demonstrated a really great capacity to look at aspects of our past, to understand it, and to take ownership of it. And I don't think that's reflected necessarily as fully as it might be at the political level or at the level of the state, the official state, but I think it's much more true of us as people. Now, I'd want to be careful about overstating that, because of course we're still neglectful. We still ignore many things that are happening within our society that we really need to take ownership of. If we look at still how we treat women to a degree in this state, if we look at the whole question of disability rights, if we look at how we still operate within a state where we depend upon charity for the cherishing of our people, that the state looks to abdicate or outsource responsibility for care still, and certainly doesn't seem to want to accept responsibility for ensuring that happens, and then the quality of care that happens within the systems that are established to make up for the absence of a really engaged, mature, considered, determined state that exists to serve and to meet the needs of its people and to respect the rights of its people fundamentally. So we still are operating very much within that very 19th century charitable model of social care, and I think that's something that we need to reflect on as well.